Europe is facing a profound economic challenge. The continent's long-held stability has been shaken to its core. Economic shocks. The war in Ukraine, which began in February 2022, was the primary trigger. This conflict did not just create a humanitarian crisis on Europe's doorstep. It also broke the economic model that had powered the EU for decades. At the heart of that model, cheap, abundant energy, in particular, natural gas from Russia. That era has now come to an abrupt and likely permanent end. The consequences are rippling across every sector of the European economy. The loss of cheap Russian energy has created a severe structural shock. European industries must now compete in a global market while paying significantly more for power. They are turning to liquefied natural gas, or LNG, sourced from around the world. The global LNG market is far more expensive and volatile. At the same time, Europe is bearing the immense financial and military cost of supporting Ukraine. Those costs divert resources from investment and growth. Higher energy prices and new geopolitical burdens are reshaping Europe's competitive landscape, making it harder for businesses to thrive. This essay will explore the central argument. We will argue these pressures risk pushing Europe into a prolonged stagnation, a lost decade. We will define key terms: deindustrialization, competitiveness, Euro stability. Deindustrialization, industrial capacity declines, factories close or move abroad. Competitiveness, ability of companies to compete internationally, influenced by energy and labor. Euro stability, health and value of the common currency, threatened by weak growth and political division. Our analysis will follow a clear path. First, evidence of immediate costs, energy price spikes, and financial commitments to Ukraine. Next, corporate responses, halts to investment and relocations outside Europe. Then, political consequences, rising discontent and strains on EU cohesion. Finally, an outlook on the difficult choices and trade-offs ahead for leaders and citizens. To understand the crisis facing the entire European Union, we must first look at Germany. Germany is the industrial heart of Europe. It is the continent's largest economy and a global manufacturing powerhouse. For decades, the German economic model was hailed as a resounding success. It was built on a foundation of highly skilled labor, world-class engineering, and crucially, access to cheap Russian gas. This affordable energy fueled its massive chemical, automotive, and heavy manufacturing sectors. The strength of German industry created prosperity at home and acted as an engine for the rest of the Eurozone, pulling other economies along with it. Germany's success story is now under serious threat. The country's heavy reliance on Russian energy has transformed from a strategic advantage into a critical vulnerability. With the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines shut down, German industries now face some of the highest energy costs in the developed world. This new reality strikes at the very core of their business model. The cost advantage they once enjoyed has evaporated, leaving them exposed to intense competition from rivals in the United States and Asia. These competitors often benefit from lower energy prices, less stringent regulations, and substantial government subsidies, creating an uneven playing field for German firms. For these reasons, Germany serves as the key test case for Europe's future. It is the canary in the coal mine. If its powerful industrial base begins to crumble, the shockwaves will be felt across the entire continent. The economic pain and dislocation experienced in Germany provide a preview of the challenges that other European nations will inevitably face. The decisions made by German policymakers and corporate leaders in the coming months will have enormous consequences. They will help determine whether Europe can successfully navigate this crisis or if it is destined for a long period of decline and political fragmentation. This essay will use Germany as a deep case study to illustrate the broader European predicament. We will analyze the data on Germany's industrial decline, from factory closures to falling export numbers. We will show how its government is struggling to respond with subsidies and green transition plans that are proving both expensive and difficult to implement. By examining the pressures on Germany, we can better understand the systemic risks to the European Union's economic stability and political cohesion. The fate of the German industrial model is inextricably linked to the fate of the entire European project, making its current struggle a story of global significance. The economic architecture of post-Cold War Europe was built on a foundation of mutual dependence. For Germany and many neighbors, this meant a strategic partnership with Russia centered on energy. Over decades, a complex network of pipelines was built: Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2, to deliver vast quantities of cheap natural gas to European industry. It was a win-win. Russia gained a stable, lucrative market. Europe secured reliable, affordable energy. This gas was the lifeblood of German manufacturing. Chemicals, cars, steel, glass, an era of stability and integration. Then, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The Kremlin weaponized energy exports, turning pipelines into instruments of coercion. In months after the invasion, Russia systematically curtailed gas flows, citing technical issues, widely dismissed as political pretexts. The goal: inflict economic pain, weaken resolve to support Ukraine, fracture Western unity. Culmination: complete shutdown of Nord Stream 1, then its mysterious, unexplained sabotage. The reliable flow of cheap gas was gone overnight. A structural break with no easy return. Trust irrevocably shattered. European leaders now aim for energy independence from Moscow. Not a short-term fix, a fundamental reorientation. A new, uncertain energy landscape. Global competition, higher prices, more volatility. The old model is broken. The path forward is costly and difficult. For Germany, the shock was seismic. Its industrial model, built on low-cost inputs, was thrown into disarray. Germany had been the single largest buyer of Russian gas, over half its imports from Russia before the war. That dependency made the shutdown hit Germany harder than other major European nations. The end of the era was an economic cataclysm at the heart of German industry. Policymakers and business leaders scrambled to keep the lights on and factories running, no matter the cost. In response to Russia's aggression, the European Union and its Western allies unleashed an unprecedented barrage of economic sanctions. These measures were designed to cripple Russia's war machine by targeting its financial institutions, freezing its central bank assets, and restricting its access to critical technologies. A central pillar was to reduce reliance on Russian energy, thereby starving the Kremlin of the revenues it needed to fund its military campaign. The EU implemented a phased-in embargo on Russian seaborne crude oil and petroleum products. A direct embargo on pipeline gas was more contentious. But EU policy choices and Russia's own supply cuts effectively amounted to a near-total severance of the energy relationship. It was a bold and morally necessary stance, but one that came with a staggering economic price tag for Europe itself. These sanctions, while aimed at Moscow, inevitably created significant blowback for the European economy. By voluntarily turning away from its largest and cheapest energy supplier, Europe was knowingly imposing a massive cost upon its own industries and consumers. It was a calculated risk, a self-inflicted economic wound accepted as the necessary price for upholding international law and supporting Ukrainian sovereignty. The decision fundamentally altered Europe's terms of trade. The continent was now forced to purchase energy on the open global market, where it had to compete with other major consumers like China and with Japan. This shift immediately exposed the EU to the harsh realities of global supply and demand, leading to price spikes that were previously unimaginable. The debate over the effectiveness and cost of these sanctions continues to rage within Europe. Critics argue the policies have harmed the European economy more than they have hindered Russia's war effort. They point to Russia redirecting energy exports to other markets like India and to China. They point to the pain of deindustrialization in countries like Germany as evidence. Proponents, however, maintain that the sanctions were essential. They argue continuing to purchase Russian energy would have been morally untenable and would have directly financed the ongoing conflict. This group contends that while the short-term costs are high, the long-term strategic benefit of breaking free from Russian leverage is invaluable for Europe's security and autonomy. Regardless of one's position in this debate, the immediate economic reality is undeniable. The policy choice to decouple from Russian energy was a primary driver of the cost shock. It was not a market failure, but a deliberate political decision made in the face of geopolitical aggression. This choice fundamentally rerouted global energy flows and reset the price baseline for European industry. The direct costs were borne by businesses facing higher utility bills, and by governments spending billions on subsidies to cushion the blow. The indirect costs, in the form of lost competitiveness and investment, are still being tallied, creating a legacy that will shape the European economy for years to come. The immediate and most visible consequence of the energy shock was a sharp contraction in industrial output, particularly in Germany's most energy-intensive sectors. Faced with astronomical energy bills that made production unprofitable, many companies curtailed operations or shut down production lines. The chemical industry was hit especially hard. BASF, Covestro both use natural gas for power and as a feedstock, and were forced into drastic measures. They reduced output at sprawling German facilities including Ludwigshafen, the world's largest integrated chemical complex. The pain reached steelmakers who idled plants or cut shifts. Glass, ceramics, paper, non-ferrous metals. Factory output plummeted, order books thinned, a sense of crisis enveloped entire manufacturing regions. These were the first casualties in what many feared was the beginning of a broader deindustrialization process. Beyond immediate production cuts, the energy crisis brought new investment to a grinding halt. Why would a company build a new factory in Germany when energy costs were triple those in the United States? Planned projects were paused, canceled, or reallocated to locations outside the European Union. This investment freeze represented a vote of no confidence with long-term hits to competitiveness, infrastructure, and jobs. Localized unemployment pockets emerged, even as national rates stayed relatively stable. When a major factory reduces shifts or closes a line, the impact ripples through the local community, affecting suppliers, service providers, and small businesses. These initial factory closures and production halts were a clear warning sign. They showed how an abstract energy shock translated into real-world consequences, planting the seeds of economic anxiety and social discontent that would later prove politically potent. While the energy shock was battering Europe's industrial base, another immense financial burden was mounting. The war in Ukraine demanded a massive and sustained commitment: financial support, humanitarian support, military support. This was not a distant conflict, but a war for the continent's security. Countries across the EU, led by major powers like Germany, France, Poland, opened their borders to millions of Ukrainian refugees, providing housing, healthcare, social support. Simultaneously, they began channeling billions of euros in direct financial aid to the Ukrainian government to help it maintain essential services and prevent a total collapse of its economy under the strain of war. The urgent need to arm Ukraine for its self-defense prompted an unprecedented transfer of military hardware: tanks, artillery systems, ammunition, air defense missiles. This support, while vital for Ukraine, came at a direct cost to European nations, who had to finance the aid and then spend even more to replenish their own depleted military stocks. For Germany, this marked a historic turning point, or Zeitenwende. The government announced a special fund of 100 billion euros to modernize its armed forces and committed to meeting the NATO target of spending 2% of GDP on defense, a significant increase after years of underinvestment. This surge in sovereign spending on defense and aid to Ukraine placed immense pressure on national budgets that were already strained after the COVID-19 pandemic. The funds directed towards these geopolitical necessities were resources that could no longer be allocated to other priorities, such as infrastructure investment, research and development, or tax cuts to stimulate the economy. It created a difficult trade-off for governments: how to balance the urgent demands of national security and international solidarity with the pressing need to support their own economies through the energy crisis. The corporate world was not immune to these costs. Many made the decision to exit the Russian market, often writing off billions of euros in assets and investments. They faced disruptions to their supply chains that had previously relied on components or raw materials from Russia or Ukraine. In every sense, the cost of the war was being felt across all levels of the European economy, compounding the damage from the energy price shock and contributing to a bleak short-term outlook. The most direct measure of this damage can be seen in industrial production figures. Across the Eurozone, and particularly in Germany, output in energy-intensive industries fell sharply throughout 2022 and 2023. At the height of the crisis, some sectors saw a production contract by 10 to 20% compared to pre-war levels. This was not a mild cyclical downturn, but a severe structural shock. This reduction in output acted as a significant drag on overall GDP growth, pushing the German economy into a technical recession. This downturn in production was mirrored by a chilling effect on business investment. Corporate boardrooms across the continent put major capital expenditure plans on hold. Uncertainty surrounding future energy prices, concerns about a potential recession, and ongoing geopolitical instability created a toxic environment for long-term planning. This investment drought is perhaps the most worrying short-term outcome, as it directly undermines the continent's future productivity and competitiveness. A factory not built today is a source of jobs and innovation that is lost for years to come. In terms of employment, the immediate impact was more nuanced but still concerning. Widespread government support, including short-time work schemes, helped prevent a massive spike in unemployment. While this cushioned the immediate social blow, it also masked the underlying weakness in the labor market. In reality, many industrial jobs were now on life support, sustained by public funds. The short-term outcomes painted a picture of an economy under severe duress. These immediate costs were not just temporary setbacks, they were deep wounds that weakened the European economy's resilience and set the stage for the more profound long-term challenges, beginning with the crisis of confidence in Europe's industrial heartland, Germany. For generations, Germany's economic identity has been inextricably linked to its manufacturing prowess. The label "Made in Germany" became a global benchmark for quality, reliability, and engineering excellence. This industrial sector is not just a part of the economy, it is its very core. Manufacturing accounts for a significantly larger share of Germany's gross domestic product compared to other advanced economies. Automotive, machinery, chemicals, electrical equipment, which collectively form the backbone of the country's export-driven model. The recent shocks have caused this powerful engine to sputter and stall. Data on German manufacturing reveals a worrying trend that predates the Ukraine war but has been dramatically accelerated by it. Export growth has slowed. More alarmingly, industrial production has been on a downward trajectory. The energy-intensive sectors have been hit the hardest. For instance, production in the chemical industry has fallen by over 20% from its pre-crisis levels. This is not a cyclical dip, it is a structural collapse. The combination of high energy prices, weakening global demand, particularly from China, and mounting regulatory burdens has created a perfect storm for Germany's industrial heartland. Well-known firms in the Mittelstand, the small and medium-sized family-owned businesses that are the hidden champions of the German economy, are struggling to survive. Many face a stark choice: absorb crippling losses, pass on costs to customers, or shut down operations entirely. Each closure represents not just a loss of economic output, but a tearing of the local social fabric and a blow to the nation's industrial confidence, raising fears of a domino effect across interconnected supply chains. The core of Germany's industrial crisis lies in a simple but brutal economic reality. It has become an exceptionally expensive place to produce goods. Following the loss of cheap Russian gas, German industries now face electricity and natural gas prices among the highest in the industrialized world. This creates a vast and persistent cost chasm between German firms and their international rivals. A chemical plant or steel mill in Germany might pay 2 to 3 times more for the same unit of energy than a competitor operating in Texas. This differential is stark when comparing Germany to the United States. The U.S. shale gas revolution has supplied cheap, abundant natural gas. As a result, the U.S. has become a magnet for new industrial investment, including from German companies. Beyond energy, other factors widen the cost chasm. Germany is a high-wage economy. It has a strong system of labor protections and a significant tax burden. German industry also faces a growing mountain of bureaucracy and complex regulations. The impact shows up in capital investment trends. Investment data shows capital flight, more money flowing out of Germany for FDI than coming in. German companies are leading this trend, building their next plants abroad to access lower costs and growing markets. This is not just about short-term profits. It's a long-term strategic shift. Faced with a brewing industrial crisis, the German government in Berlin has been scrambling to formulate a response. The primary tool deployed has been massive financial support. Billions of euros have been spent on energy price caps and direct subsidies to shield households and industries. These measures provide temporary relief, but are fiscally unsustainable. They create a dependency on state aid, and they keep parts of industry on government life support. Complicating this is the Energiewende. Phase out nuclear power, phase out coal, shift to wind, shift to solar. The transition carries colossal costs. Shutdowns of nuclear and coal increased reliance on natural gas. The result? Policy paralysis in the three-party coalition. Social Democrats, SPD, Greens, Free Democrats, FDP. Debates over subsidized industrial electricity prices. Disagreements on budget priorities, debt limits, and pace of deregulation cause infighting. Policy uncertainty is toxic for business. Companies can't make long-term investment decisions. The clearest signal of Germany's declining competitiveness is the growing number of companies choosing to invest abroad rather than at home. This is an active and strategic redirection of capital. The United States has emerged as a primary beneficiary. The combination of cheap energy from shale gas and the massive subsidies offered through the Inflation Reduction Act has created an almost irresistible pull. The IRA provides hundreds of billions of dollars in tax credits and incentives for green technology manufacturing, from electric vehicle batteries to hydrogen production. China also remains a critical destination for German corporate investment. For industries like automotive, China is not just a low-cost production base, but also the world's largest and fastest-growing market. Major firms like Volkswagen, BASF, and Linde have all made high-profile announcements about shifting multi-billion-euro investments away from Germany and Europe, sending a chilling message about their confidence in the future of Germany as an industrial location. To understand the corporate logic, there is no better case study than BASF, the world's largest chemical company and a quintessential pillar of German industry. In response, BASF's management has made a series of stark and decisive moves. The company announced a permanent and significant downsizing of its operations in Germany. This includes the closure of several energy-intensive plants, including an ammonia plant. The company explicitly stated that due to high energy costs and over-regulation, its European operations were no longer competitive. The centerpiece of BASF's new strategy is a massive €10 billion investment in a new, state-of-the-art Verbund site in Zhanjiang, China. BASF is essentially building a new version of Ludwigshafen in China, one designed for the geopolitical and economic realities of the 21st century. This move is a clear vote of no confidence. The company is not abandoning Germany entirely. However, the loss of bulk chemical production represents a hollowing out of its industrial base. The story of BASF is a cautionary tale for Germany. The future of the country's entire industrial model is in serious jeopardy. The decline of major industrial sites in Germany creates powerful and painful ripple effects that spread through the national and European economies. A vast network of local suppliers, logistics companies, maintenance contractors, and service providers depends on the factory. When the factory downsizes, these smaller firms lose contracts and may even go out of business entirely. This process hollows out the economic base of entire regions. As high-paying industrial jobs disappear, they are often replaced, if at all, by lower-paying service jobs. The spillover effects do not stop at the German border. Germany's economy is the central hub of the EU single market, deeply integrated with its neighbors through complex supply chains. When German industrial output falls, demand for these components also falls, transmitting the economic shock directly to its EU partners. A weaker German industrial engine means slower growth and fewer jobs for the entire continent. The economic anxieties inevitably spill over into the political arena, reshaping voter sentiment and redrawing the electoral map. Across Europe, and with particular intensity in Germany, a direct line can be drawn between economic pain and the rising fortunes of populist and right-wing political parties. They craft a compelling narrative that blames the established political class, Brussels bureaucracy, and costly green policies for the people's problems. In Germany, the right-wing Alternative for Deutschland, AfD, has seen its support surge, especially in the formerly industrial and economically struggling eastern states. This phenomenon is not unique to Germany. In France, in Italy, in the Netherlands, the common thread is the channeling of economic discontent into a nationalist and anti-establishment political platform. The cost of living crisis, fueled by the energy shock, has acted as a powerful accelerant for these movements, giving them a tangible kitchen table issue that directly impacts the daily lives of millions. The surge of nationalist and populist sentiment across member states poses a direct threat to the European Union's ability to act cohesively. This political fragmentation weakens the EU from within, making it harder to formulate and execute the unified strategies needed. The result is a growing risk of policy paralysis. This fragmentation is starkly visible in debates over key policy areas. Consider the reluctance for further fiscal transfers. Divergent energy strategies further illustrate the challenge. National interests are reasserting themselves over collective European goals. The consensus on foreign policy, particularly towards Russia and China, is also becoming harder to maintain. As economic pain deepens, the temptation for individual member states to break ranks will grow stronger. The combination of slow growth, persistent inflation, and political fragmentation creates a hazardous environment for the euro. The current crisis is pulling these foundations apart. As the European Central Bank sets a single monetary policy, this one-size-fits-all approach becomes increasingly problematic. An interest rate appropriate for France might be too restrictive for a recession-hit Germany. The common currency lacks a full fiscal union. Its stability in past crises ultimately relied on political will and the creation of emergency support mechanisms. However, as nationalist politics gain ground, the political consensus required to deploy these backstops is no longer guaranteed. The market's faith in the whatever-it-takes promise is eroding. The interplay between economic hardship and political fragmentation creates a dangerous, self-reinforcing, vicious cycle. It begins with an external shock. which triggers industrial decline. That economic pain fuels political discontent. As they gain power, they block coherent long-term policy. Political fragmentation accelerates economic decline. Investment dries up, competitiveness falls, factories close, jobs are lost. The problem feeds back into more public anger and more votes for populists. This creates systemic risk for the EU. The single market is threatened. The euro's stability is undermined. The EU's global influence fades. The cycle can hollow out the European project. Looking ahead, Europe's trajectory is not predetermined. The choices made will steer the continent. The first and most optimistic scenario is one of managed adjustment and coordinated reform. In this future, European leaders respond with decisive, unified action, turning the green transition into an engine of growth. A second, more pessimistic scenario is one of prolonged stagnation and political fragmentation. This is the future where the vicious cycle takes hold. In this future, Europe becomes a museum of industrial history. A third, middle ground scenario is one of partial recovery and uneven innovation. In this future, Europe muddles through. It avoids a complete collapse but fails to achieve a dynamic, coordinated recovery, creating a two-speed Europe. Mitigating the risk of a lost decade requires a clear-eyed and pragmatic policy response. A coordinated EU energy strategy, a bonfire of bureaucracy, and massive investment in skills and worker retraining. Ultimately, the choice ahead for Europe is stark, and the trade-offs are severe. The era of effortless prosperity is over. Failure to act decisively risks condemning the continent to a future of slow-motion decline. Europe has overcome profound crises in the past through its capacity for renewal and integration. The question now is whether that same spirit can be summoned once more to navigate this defining moment and forge a new foundation for a prosperous and secure future.